Hi, I'm Jeremy Ruston, and welcome to the 60th TiddlyWiki Hangout. Today I'm joined by, from left to right on my screen, Yaka. Would you like to say hi, say where you're from, and introduce yourself?
Okay, so I'm French, as you probably can hear. I've been using TiddlyWiki on and off since version 2, I guess, and I've been using it for a variety of purposes, from personal notebook as intended to basis to write documentations and user manuals and that sort of stuff, and mainly as a research tool. Unfortunately, so far I haven't used it as much as I'd like in production contexts, mainly due to unreliability in terms of storage and things like that, which makes me a bit wary of entrusting it with things I give to other people. So as long as I use it myself, I'm happy with it, mostly, but I really look forward to the ability to use it as a diffusion and possibly workgroup platform.
Yaka, is there any of that stuff that you might be able to show? A very popular thing that we sometimes do on Hangouts is people screen share so that they can show other people, you know, the kind of personal TiddlyWikis that wouldn't normally get posted online. And it's a very popular feature.
Not right now, because I happen to be on a fresh install on this machine, so I don't know most of.
But if you manage to join us again and are able to do
that, I'll make sure to do that for next time I'll join the chat.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Yaka. Great to have you here. Eric, hiya. How are you?
I didn't realize that the order was here. Hi, I'm Eric Schulman. I'm author of Tiddly Tools and lead developer / maintainer of TiddlyWiki Classic. I'm located in Silicon Valley, California, and I've been using TiddlyWiki since April of 2005.
I believe that's right. We do, I was tweeting about this earlier in the week, we do occasionally get people who say things like, I've been using TiddlyWiki for 11 years, which I always really love, remembering a book before it was written. Mario, hi, how are you?
Hi folks, yeah, my name is Mario Pitsch. I'm from Austria, near Salzburg, contributor to TiddlyWiki Classic with themes and plugins, and with TiddlyWiki 5 mainly translating the stuff.
Yes, well, and quite a lot else as well. Nathan, hiya, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Very well, yes.
I'm Nathan Kane. I'm a developer from the United States, on the opposite coast from Eric. I've been working with TiddlyWiki 5 as a developer for about a year now, and have been helping my girlfriend through using TiddlyWiki as a user.
Indeed. Great to have you here, everybody. Thank you very much, as usual, for giving up your time, especially given the exciting developments in California in an hour and 40 minutes that everywhere I seem to read at the moment is rather focused on, which is the Apple launch, parenthetically. So let's go straight into the topics we've got for today. The first one is something that was just raised by Mario, which is what do we need to do in order to make the empty version of TiddlyWiki available in different languages? So I think the part of the prompt for this is that Mario has recently translated the Getting Started material into German. Mario, you were saying that you were lined up to screencast, so it'd be quite interesting to see the translation and so on.
Yeah, okay. So I'll screencast. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, at the moment this is running at localhost, so with a development environment, and the starting screen will be something like this, which is willkommen, which is welcome, and some introduction. What can you do with TiddlyWiki? And then the getting started in German is called Erste Schritte, and I have translated this stuff. So all the installations with Android, with Chrome, with Firefox, Internet Explorer, and sometimes there we have the green button, which says you can download the empty document, which already works. But then there is right-click and say save the target as. And as you can see here, it points to the empty.html. So my question now is that we need something, a possibility, that we also store an German empty or something like this, because the fallback save mechanism uses this.
And I guess as well, I mean, I hadn't realized that you meant, what it looks like what you've translated here is TiddlyWiki.com, not just the...
it's part of TiddlyWiki.com. So because the standard translation is easy. But this is, let's say, a German edition. So you can download the document like this. So they click on this button and get all the content. Or they can say, okay, save an empty document. And what they get is the empty version, which has all the language settings to German, so that you have the default. There is only German and English is there for the texts, and then they can start editing. This tab, So
that's super.
So what I want to have is a possibility somewhere at TiddlyWiki.com that you have English version, a German version, which is also empty, because sometimes you have to say right-click and then save as.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. It does tie into something that's on my to-do list. Let me screen share here.
So I will unscreen share.
Should we close that? So I'm so sorry. This is showing you my, well, I've shown this a few times now, but this is my internal to-do list, and it's not always written for an external audience, because that's the that's what's useful sometimes about keeping notes for yourself. Right, so there's a bunch of reorganization I need to do around TiddlyWiki.com. One of them is splitting off the dev documentation into a separate wiki, which is going to be /dev. I don't think actually I'd written down very clearly the other things, but it's about giving each of the plugins their own edition. Where did I... Okay, yes, it's this line here. Sort out plugin demo editions, plugin readmes, installation instructions. So it might actually be worth starting a new tiddler for this, TiddlyWiki.com reorganization. And we've got TiddlyWiki.com/dev. We need to introduce, that'd be dev.index.html. We need, for the languages, I was guessing we'd do something like this. And then, and TiddlyWiki.com/plugins index.html would be a list of all plugins.
Sorry, Nathan, can you mute again? Because Google will always switch
you back.
the live channel.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. That was not very thrilling episode of seeing me typing. But what I was trying to show was that we need to, for each plugin, we need an index.html file that contains that plugin and has, the easily accessible documentation, and that would be the normal target for a link when you were talking about a plugin. It's possible that we'd also have a copy of the plugin itself as a TID file, but at the moment there's not very much usefully you can do with those. Then for each language, have an index and an empty.
Does GitHub allow you to create a structure like this?
Yes. So I've already got TiddlyWiki.com/talkie-talkie And wow. Okay, I haven't. That makes
I also think all the demos are gone, so because I did try a little bit and
that's interesting.
GitHub is so awesome sometimes.
Wow, that's a bit odd, isn't it? I mean, the talkie folder's there, index.html is there. Wow. Well, that's a fun feature of Firefox then, isn't it? Oh, and it works now. Oh, because, sorry guys, that was the normal problem of me not being able to type. Right, but laboriously we are where we were supposed to be, which was just to show that in the GitHub Pages repo I've already got subfolders for the static HTML pages and for the talkie stuff. So yes, we can support all this, and none of it relies on any clever DNS magic or anything.
Jeremy, so should we create build scripts for the languages that create all languages in that way, or should we provide the index HTML to create the pull request? So for the
no, you should provide the build scripts.
Okay.
So build.sh should continue to build everything.
Okay.
As ever, there's scope for some refactoring in there. Yeah. But yes, we build everything from scratch. I mean, one of the things I guess that is a question for you is whether you would want to use include wikis to bring in the English TiddlyWiki.com content behind your German content, so to speak, so that for tiddlers that didn't have a German definition, the English definition would show through.
Yeah, the English definition is generally always there with the German editions.
And do you use include wikis for that?
No, I just include the core always has the texts. I don't. The English wiki. If I don't have any content for something, I just create a link to see to the main page. So see at TiddlyWiki.com and so on. So in general, I want to have a little bit less content. So there is the installation thing that I've showed you, and then there will be some information about the TiddlyWiki syntax.
Yeah.
And that's basically maybe a little bit about how you can create your own macros. But I think that's what's on the German page. So
okay, so you wouldn't have English content. You'd have when you reach the edge of the German content, you'd have links to the English content.
Yes, right. So there are some, for example, the Node.js content. So there is a.
Yeah.
I'll share again. If I have, as you can see here, I have the Node.js content, which has the basic structure. So it creates the tabs. Right. But then I say, okay, go to getting started Node.js on the main page. I have some tools here. It says what's missing. No, what is it? Is it fehlend? Yeah. So what's missing? So there is something add-on, FireFox, GitHub, and so on. And I'll create tiddlers for those. And if I don't want to provide content at the moment for the beginning, I just link to the main page. So I can have all the links that really lead to something useful. So I have the TiddlyWiki link. There should be a Jeremy Ruston link, and all this stuff. So that you can click everything, and if I don't want to provide content, I just link to the main page.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
There will be some information for this has to be translated, saving the encrypted version, saving to TiddlySpot will be there. yeah, then there will be information about Tiddly Desktop. Yeah, that's
Okay.
it. Plus,
So, I mean,
plus all the stuff. Yeah.
I noticed that there is already a DE-AT-DE edition. Is that, would you reuse that one, or would you have a separate Austrian and German edition?
I think Austrian German can be the same, because there is only a very little difference between Austrian German and German German.
But they'd get a different flag. The default language would be different. That feels like quite a big difference.
Ah, okay. So if I say you're meaning this, if I say tools, and I have this one. Ah, you're right. Okay, yeah, this makes a difference. Okay. So there should be two versions.
So your pull request could perhaps delete the existing DE-AT-DE edition and bring in the two new ones.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'll create two new editions. But yeah, at the moment it's only the default setting which shows an Austrian flag, and the other one will show a German flag.
Yeah.
Because basically at the moment there is absolutely no difference.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, but I think the flag is difference enough. And that, I mean, part of the function of having an empty.html in each language is so that you don't have to change the language after all, isn't it?
Yes, right.
To get started.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, there was a couple of questions from Yaka in the group, apologies. I'm going to take the second one first. It's vaguely in the same topic. Yaka's asking about support in the core for handling content in multiple languages. And that's something we have discussed before. So let me just explain what I think Yaka's asking for is the ability to provide multiple tiddlers with, I guess, the same name, that are tagged somehow as being in different languages, and then to present the user with the appropriate one for their language, which implies a sort of preferred language list. So imagine a Austrian fellow might look at DE-AT content falling back to DE-D content falling back to English content, that kind of thing. Is that what you had in mind, Yaka?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And then one further wrinkle would be, under this scheme, the tiddler titles might be the English title for each tiddler, but maybe we'd need something like a caption field, so there could be a localized title for each tiddler, which would be the one that would actually be displayed, and obviously the user would have to translate the links so that they would link to the English tiddler with the name, with the caption of the German tiddler, if you see what I mean, as the display text. So no, there's not really sufficient adequate support for it. The intention is to be able to support it. There are some features that make it easier to do some of that stuff. So, for instance, if you run under Node.js, you can do what I was first suggesting to Mario, which is to have, for example, a German wiki that includes the English wiki. And then if you build the German wiki, then you would, for tiddlers that exist in German, you'd get the German version, and that would overwrite the English version. And for tiddlers that only existed in English, you'd get the English version. So that's using this sort of server-side composition of multiple wiki folders into a single TiddlyWiki, and using that as a way of prioritizing the different language tiddlers. But we don't have anything that works in the browser that provides any similar features at the moment.
Jeremy?
Hello.
I'm using already this mechanism, so I can share again, just to switch a little bit. So, for example, what I'm using locally here now is the server edition. So similar to your server development, it uses the TiddlyWiki.info file, which includes TiddlyWeb and the file system, and it includes the wiki where let's say the content is. And so it's exactly the mechanism that you said. And here we have the German version, and all the tiddlers that I added with the server are part content of this tiddlers directory. And this will be the repository where I create the pull request after I did some refactoring with the directory slowly.
Okay, but you were saying that you got something similar to Yaka's requirement.
Yeah, this is exactly this. So.
Oh, I see. Because it's an illustration of what I was describing. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that sounds like it could work perfectly in Node.js. Probably not as convenient for the standalone version, or can you implement that without problems in the standalone version?
I think there is a possibility if you really if you use your content like a theme, but then it will overwrite the existing content, and then you would switch back, for example, to English theme, or let's say English content, and all your content will be English, or you have for me German content, and all your content will be German. This would be possible, but you can't have it at the same time. So if you want to see the English content and the German content at the same time, then you need to use different names for tiddlers.
Yeah, okay. Well, in theory, it could be possibly easier to starting from a skeleton, say in English, to build alternative versions of tiddlers that could be automatically named, renamed with a suffix corresponding to the language, maybe, which would help distinguish them.
Yes, I think that's the kind of thing that we would like to gradually add. There's a few related features like aliases, the ability to refer to a single tiddler by multiple titles, that are also on the roadmap. So yes, it's I mean, the use case is one that we recognize well, but we've only solved it to the extent necessary, really, for translating TiddlyWiki itself at the moment.
And I think there is also the project from TheDiveO, where he invents something like namespaces, where you can have two tiddlers, but you have a different prefix.
I'm not sure that is quite what he's done.
Yes, you could create two tiddlers with the same name, but you have a different prefix. Would be possible. If you are having a look at the build TiddlyWiki, so there is no need for Node.js. So because with this mechanism from the TiddlyFox, with the directory structure, you definitely have something like a namespace.
Right. Well, now hang on. What the TiddlyBard's done is it's a process for building plugins that involves both Node.js and the browser. So Node.js is still required. And B, the prefix handling is all it is. It's very useful actually, but all it is having the file system adapter organizing tiddlers into tiddler files into subdirectories according to their names, but it doesn't. That feature doesn't manifest itself outside of the file system adapter, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, you're right, but I would misuse it to create the namespace. It's possible. I tested it already.
Oh, okay. What, by what, using symlinks or something?
No, just use somewhere a DE subdirectory and a what is it? English EN directory. But then you have two directory structures, and basically you get two different tiddlers because the tiddler name already contains the namespace. It's possible.
Oh, I see what you mean. So what that lets you do, all that lets you do is have the same tiddler file in multiple locations, but when it's loaded by TiddlyWiki, it gets given a different title by virtue of the directory it found it in.
Yes, right, exactly.
Yes, got you.
But you basically get two different tiddlers, and then you could create a view template that respects a language setting, and then maybe then you need a fallback. So if there is no German version, for example, then it should show the English version.
Yes. So I mean, yes, that prefix is certainly to me the natural way of, well, it's a natural way of handling the titles, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what the disadvantage is that you get a little bit strange titles. So you have something like DE/Tiddler name or EN/Tiddler name. So it's a little bit strange. But yeah, if people get used to it, it should work.
Yeah, well, that's where I think this caption field could be useful for.
Okay, yeah, and maybe the alias mechanism, yeah.
Yeah. Yaka's saying in. Oh, okay. So Yaka's specific requirement is actually very close to ours. It's to have a separate TiddlyWiki for each language, and not what I was rather focusing on was the slightly different requirement of a single TiddlyWiki that could be switched between different display languages. So that's good. Great, Yaka. On that basis, you'll be able to pretty much, I think, copy what you're just about to see Mario commit for the German translation.
Well, actually, the idea was that I can see a strong benefit in being able to host multiple languages version in the same TiddlyWiki.
Yeah.
Insofar as it would help ongoing localization.
Yes. Yes. So you can do it bit by bit.
As users can contribute to them on the fly.
Yeah.
You can give a language and then adding Tiddler by Tiddler translation as they become available.
Yes. No, that makes perfect sense. Good. I mean, I must say, with TiddlyWiki Classic, we were lucky. We got a very large number of translations, and translating TiddlyWiki Classic was a pain in the neck. I think we've made it much easier for TiddlyWiki 5, and so I'm hoping we'll see the same. I mean, I think there's been a lot of, there's not much impetus to produce translations while we're still in beta with things changing, but I'm hoping we'll get the same profusion of translations. I've always found one of the most fun things about TiddlyWiki for me has been the global nature of its users. And the insights I get, the computer industry is terribly focused on the West Coast of America's interpretation of what everybody needs. And so, for instance, working with Bram Chen on the Chinese translations of TiddlyWiki, and therefore being aware that there are users of TiddlyWiki in China whose needs, aren't even particularly clear to me because they're using it in a context that's necessarily quite alien for me. But to the extent that I get to understand a little bit more about the world, I think it's awesome. And I love the idea of a tool that is language agnostic, that can be useful in any language. TiddlyWiki Classic we saw translated into Hebrew, Thai, all kinds of exotic scripts that, for the most part, look pretty cool as well. And yeah, I think that's a really nice thing about the way TiddlyWiki has evolved. Oh, sorry, I haven't got my camera on. I could have been saying all of that with my face showing. Sorry about that. Yaka asked another question a little bit further up, which was, I'd like to delve into the general topic of getting people familiarized with TiddlyWiki, if at all possible, now that the public release is coming. And Yaka, yes, that's a topic that's of great interest to me at the moment. So it's also something that we spend a lot of time worrying about in the group, the focus being that the documentation of TiddlyWiki has evolved in a way that makes it not always optimal for all users, he says tactfully. But one great thing that you may not have seen yet is that over the last few days we've had a number of contributions from Dave Gifford, able to attend the Hangout today, but does quite often attend. And he's been working on reorganizing the core TiddlyWiki documentation. So, hello there. So apologies, I should explain. This is the pre-release of 5.017, which I'm hoping will be released tomorrow now. And all this introductory stuff and the material linked here is new from Dave. Now, we haven't yet changed the default tiddlers, and there's still things like this docs tiddler at the end, which really needs to go. But you can see here what Dave is presenting as the introductory material. And over in the table of contents, we've got two things. We've got the, let me get rid of that guy. We've got the table of contents as it currently is on TiddlyWiki.com, which is what you might call a hard-boiled table of contents, as in laboriously I have typed out this structure. Whereas what we've got up here is the new table of contents that's built with tags, and takes advantage of this selective expandy collapsey stuff. So this is very, very much a work in progress, and won't necessarily all be done by the time we release 5.017. But it's, I think what Dave's done here is several sort of orthogonal things. He's contributed text, so there's a good deal of wording, but really I think the more important thing he's contributing is a different tone that more directly addresses a prospective user of TiddlyWiki and takes them by the hand through what they need to learn and do to use TiddlyWiki and to not lose their data. He's proposing a overall structure for the documentation, and a sort of a narrative, as in this stuff, which is a flow for getting into TiddlyWiki. So one change I do intend to make is to add a new screencast somewhere quite close to the top, possibly even in hello there, or maybe a little thumbnail that when you click on it opens the video. We've got he's managed to keep a lot of the text that's on TiddlyWiki.com at the moment is very old and mostly was written before TiddlyWiki was finished, and so the challenge then was I wanted to the text to explain what TiddlyWiki was, what was interesting about it, and to provide the necessary reference information, but it couldn't target prospective users of TiddlyWiki because for a long time it wasn't really at the stage where it was ready for prospective users. So it's needed this quite thorough overhaul for some time. I think Dave's done a great job of keeping some of the distinctive language that I had originally used and that I like. So he's still talking about it as being non-linear and so on. But he's filled in a lot more. So this discover thing needs a bit more detail, but is a kind of step-by-step presentation explaining what TiddlyWiki is, and there's the beginnings of this is a list of what you can use it for, so it's sort of examples are included here, but also just ideas. And quite a fun one is what are the reasons for using TiddlyWiki? So some of them are sort of features. Finding your notes in TiddlyWiki is lightning fast. Some of it is really about the open sourceness of TiddlyWiki. Well, that maybe these last 3 points are about that. So he's captured some of the things that are important about TiddlyWiki in a way that hopefully makes sense to a casual prospective user. So this is part of our response, Yaka. I mean, part of what we're trying to do is to make TiddlyWiki.com itself be the best way for most people to learn TiddlyWiki, and that means dialing the level of technical detail way back. So we still need to keep all of what are currently labeled advanced features, but which are really, I think, the reference material. But we need to, add much more of this really basic stuff. So this is a tiddler, for instance, talking about how you navigate between tiddlers, which is worth explaining and is the kind of stuff that wasn't really covered before. So I'm expecting that for me, I've got some little bits of coding to do, but I'm really hoping that most of the next week, the time I've got to spend on TiddlyWiki will be on fixing the documentation. I've also planning to take the development documentation out, which in here there's quite a bundle of material that's really only written for JavaScript developers. Some of it is useful for people who are making a translation of TiddlyWiki. Doesn't technically require development skills, but it requires access to GitHub and so on. So I'm hoping that will help. Yaka, I mean, in terms of generally, you use the phrase getting people familiarized. So the other part of the challenge for me is getting the word out about TiddlyWiki. So I'm very lucky that I hear it on the group and hear from lots of enthusiastic users of TiddlyWiki. And it seems clear, I think, to many of us that there's a vast population of people out there who would love TiddlyWiki if only they got to hear about it.
Yeah, if I may expand a little bit on the point I was trying to delineate, I think one of the main issues, speaking from personal experience, is that I've been over the years talking to a lot of people about try out TiddlyWiki. It's a very interesting environment and it's very exciting, and the high concept of it is very attractive to a lot of people. But unfortunately, it's not that easy to get into, and certainly TiddlyWiki 5 is different from Classic in that regard in many ways. But one of the reasons I think it's not very easy to get into is that because the high concept is so different from everything most people have ever used, it can be a bit overwhelming. In the sense that, say, for the examples you were giving about documentation are totally relevant and pertinent and usable for people like me. Like, I'm not a coder, but I'm sort of a power user. I've been fiddling with my operating systems and I've scripted a bit and that sort of stuff. So I have no preventions against reading the manual and delving in documentation before I get my feet into something. But for many users whose experience of computing is mostly in content consumption and the occasional editing within a framework, TiddlyWiki can be at once very exciting and overwhelming because there are so many mobile parts in it. And I guess one possible lead to make it easier for people both to embrace and to promote would be to maybe try and focus on specific use cases, and maybe not go so far as to make different flavors of TiddlyWiki, but from the get-go address people in terms of, okay, say you want to do that with TiddlyWiki. Your application is that for TiddlyWiki, or your primary application or initial application is this. Here's how you go about it, so that people get a chance to get into it immediately and get a use for it and build from there, because it's much easier for most people to learn by incrementally adding bits of knowledge to something they're already doing than to delve through hundreds of pages of documentation before they get the big picture, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly, that's exactly what happened to TiddlyWiki originally. So TiddlyWiki Classic has always presented itself much like it does today as a general purpose tool. The thing that happened early in 2005, so about 6 months after it was released, was that a specific Getting Things Done edition of TiddlyWiki was done by somebody else, by a guy called Nathan Bowers. and it fascinated me and impressed me because what he did in one sense was very little. He restyled TiddlyWiki so that it had actually a slightly different layout and a slightly different color scheme, and he primed it with some content explaining how to use it. But in fact, functionally, it was pretty much TiddlyWiki out of the box, and most of the documentation was about conventions for using it. So when that happened, I reached the same conclusion as you, Yaka, that for most people, the easiest way into TiddlyWiki is via a manifestation of it that is focused on a particular usage. So in the TiddlyWiki Classic days, we warmly welcomed these adaptations, as we called them. And if you go to tiddlyspot.com today, you'll see that there's 3 or 4 different versions of TiddlyWiki Classic that you can use when you create a new TiddlySpot. And that was very much what we were aiming for. With TiddlyWiki 5, this idea has been carried forwards, but under a slightly different name. We've got the concept of an edition of TiddlyWiki, which is the TiddlyWiki core plus some set of plugins plus some exemplary content that explains what the edition is for. And the goal is to publish TiddlyWiki under multiple editions. So in fact, let me screen share and explain. Just tying this back to something we were talking about earlier, it means that actually we need we'll have TiddlyWiki index.html, but we'd also have tiddlywiki.com editions, I don't know, GTD index.html, and GTD empty.html. So right now the infrastructure for these multiple editions exists, but the editions that we have, you can see here in this list here, are what's the word? They're all rather technically focused. They're either demos. This edition is a demo of the D3 plugin. This edition is a demo of the Code Mirror plugin. I talked about those before, how we need to move them around, give them some consistent naming. And it's actually only the empty edition, that is designed to be used as a starting point for users. But one of the things that I would like to do is to take Alberto's work and use this as the basis for an edition of TiddlyWiki designed for scholars, which is obviously what he's intending here. But it's a great example of an edition. It's TiddlyWiki with 3 additional plugins, just the French translation at this point, and a bunch of content that explains how to use it. So once all that's up and running, then the getting started place, instead of diving straight into what do you do, which browser are you on, would instead start with, okay, what do you want to use TiddlyWiki for? One thing that I also noticed with some interest was that somebody posted to the group that they were using TiddlyWiki 5 for to-do list management, for getting things done, just using this simple template we've got as an example on tiddlywiki.com. So that made me think that it might be a reasonable thing to do to pull that example out into an edition now. So we offer an edition called To Do, for instance, and even though it would be very simple, it might be a useful way of signposting that there's an opportunity for people to help us work together on creating editions that go a bit deeper than this very simple example. Does that make sense, Yaka?
Yeah, it does. But from a higher concept view, I guess it goes to a larger question as to what is the intended audience for TiddlyWiki 5 shortly after the initial release. In the sense that if you want to get the word out to the broadest possible audience, I think there is much to gain in accounting for the fact that you will have a lot of people who are not even close to power users, and some of them barely computer literate, in the sense that you would understand as computer literate, because their experience comes from mostly using tools that are based on templating and that sort of stuff. But maybe that's not what you want. I have no idea about that, in the sense that maybe it will still be an early public release, and maybe that's something you want to build on 6 months or a year down the road. You do not want an eternal September syndrome, you know. So I have no idea about.
Well, in terms of plans, I mean, what the release of TiddlyWiki means is not that it's finished or anything like it. It just means that we've got to the point of stability where I'm prepared to say to users, okay, if you start creating content now, future changes won't break your content. So it's that promise of backwards compatibility. Going forwards, I recognize exactly what you say. Well, hang on. My response to what you say is, I don't know who gets the most use out of TiddlyWiki. What I think I need to focus on is constructing the project in such a way that it's possible for groups of people and users that I've never thought of or anticipated to use it, and to by having this editions mechanism to make it possible for them to share their work. So if I've learned anything about TiddlyWiki, it's that although there are some common usages that crop up time and time again, like to-do lists, there's an infinite array, or it appears infinite array, of use cases out there. One of the first blogs I found about TiddlyWiki 5, when it was very early in development, was somebody using it as a gamer's Bible, which I'd never even heard of. But this is this idea of, while you're playing a game, collecting the information that you build up during playing the game so that you can refer to it and use it in your later progress through the game. So it's kind of like a campaign notebook. And those kinds of things, you know, the more of those that pop up, the more I realize that I can't anticipate what people are going to do with it. So I need to sort of take a step back, really, so that I'm presenting a product for general usage, but I'm also presenting a platform that anybody can use to refine the product into specific solutions for specific problem areas.
Jeremy, if I could jump in a bit
here. Please do.
Historically speaking, of course, the TiddlyWiki Classic ecosystem has a number of sort of well-developed targeted applications, but initially it was just as wide open as TiddlyWiki 5. And I think in terms of the question of who to target as the audience after, in this initial period of release of TiddlyWiki 5, there's definitely two targets. One, we want to encourage people to think of this as a robust tool for doing things in their life, which means rolling out a number of very common utilities like to-do lists and note-taking for gaming and other sort of applications rolled around TiddlyWiki. But we also need to encourage the growth of the new ecosystem itself. We need to develop the audience of authors who are going to create these new uses for it.
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of a split emphasis here. Initially, you think, oh, initial rollout, we're saying here it is, ready for use, just take it out of the box and have fun. But then TiddlyWiki itself is a very malleable object, and so part of its initial use is build stuff with it. I said in the chat just a bit ago, I said I think of TiddlyWiki as like Minecraft for documents. And if you've ever seen people play Minecraft, most of it seems to be about setting things up and building things with it rather than some sort of a game within that environment. But then there are people who have built sort of a game context on top of the basic three-dimensional Minecraft space. But the question is always, who's the game for? Is it for people who want to just go there and kill creatures, or is it for people who want to construct houses? And I think in a similar way, TiddlyWiki has that. Do you want to just go there and write documents, or do you want to build document applications with it?
Yeah, I think that all works. I guess while you were talking, it made it clearer that maybe I could describe it as a spiral. So we're spiraling out from this core edition of TiddlyWiki to be able to offer other editions, other plugins, and so on. But as we do so, it moves from being what Jeremy does to being what the community does. And so it's as if, therefore, the audience for TiddlyWiki also, you said this in almost exactly the same words, Eric, that the audience is both the TiddlyWiki community, those are the people who are going to, like Alberto, build these editions for specific purposes, and then increasingly the audience being ordinary people, but that we talk to them through these editions, so that what you talk to somebody in the context of a university about is this Scholars edition, and that the default edition of TiddlyWiki, it becomes what's the word, like a raw ingredient, and isn't like a raw ingredient. It isn't something over time that we'd necessarily expect casual end users to consume. It would be more, once filtered through what the community have added to it, that it becomes a useful tool. So it's
curiously, I'm sorry to jump in, but curiously, I'm reminded of the Monkey GTD GST, same thing, and the way in which their audience, their community, often treated it as a closed application. They sort of looked at it as, this is GSD, and when's the next update coming, rather than saying, oh, this is built on a malleable platform and we can just tweak it ourselves. They were all about, can I request a change, and the next update would, and they saw it as a complete application rather than as something built on TiddlyWiki. Although they fully understood it had that TiddlyWiki-ness to it. It was kind of a curious.
There's another example that a very, very early adaptation of TiddlyWiki was into something called Twine, which is a interactive fiction engine, and I've probably chosen a completely inappropriate one, because some of them are inappropriate, but they, you can see here, powered by TiddlyWiki. And if I do a view source, which I've forgotten the keyboard shortcut for, you'll see that in fact it's diverged a long way from TiddlyWiki. There's some of TiddlyWiki's code in there, but it's become pretty much its own thing. And I really love that. The most marvelous thing about working on the web is this the way that an open ecosystem permits these kind of forks and migrations, and we're all using each other's work as the basis for creating new stuff. And yeah, I really like that. And I'm very clear on what I enjoy about TiddlyWiki is the mental challenge of creating something that can be used in a wide variety of contexts. And that very interest on my part, it makes me hopefully the right person to create TiddlyWiki, but it means that I'm almost certainly not the right person to do something like this, which is a piece of work that I tremendously admire. But it necessarily came out of the brain of somebody with these specific needs, and yeah, it would be hard for me to pretend to have those needs because I kind of don't. My needs are a bit different. So does that does that help, Yaka? I appreciate Eric and I have both now waffled on for ages.
Well, yeah, it does in a sense. No, it does really, but what I was.
But it raises more questions. That's always the way, isn't it?
Well, no, it brings me back to an old question actually that predates TiddlyWiki. It's a broader question. That's the same question that was raised back when people tried to make Linux popular.
Yeah.
In my view, you basically have three big types of audiences for that sort of tool. And one is pure geeks that will dig out the tool for its own sake because it's sexy, it's interesting, and you can do so many things with it that it becomes an end in itself. In the way that you could fiddle with it forever and add stuff for the sake of adding stuff or tweaking stuff to make it better. And on the extreme opposite of the spectrum, you have people who just want to use a tool and consider it, as Eric said, as a discrete application, a self-contained application. And in the middle, you have those people who are a little bit aware that there is something happening deep in the bilge, and they may want to break out the toolbox and fiddle a little, but they still want something done, and they will get to fiddling and to tweaking by way of actually using the tool in the first place. And I think one of the big problems that we can learn from experience from say Linux and other open source projects like that is that if you intend, and again it's an hypothetical, maybe you don't want, but if you want it to reach a broader public, it needs to be easy to use and to find a use for in the first place. And yet not limiting people in the sense of not giving people the sensation that it's a self-contained tool. So it has to at the same time be usable early on and hint fairly clearly that you can change it, you can make it your own. But not simply, break the pieces like a mechano box in front of people who have no clue what a wrench is and tell them, okay, you can build anything, it's so cool.
So I think that a couple of interesting things in there. I think our immediate audience absolutely is technical people with a small t. So there's lots of people in the TiddlyWiki community who, well, let's put Nathan, if you don't mind me mentioning you, Nathan, as one extreme. Nathan is an experienced developer who has arrived at TiddlyWiki and is using it as a tool in several ways. At the other extreme, there's people like Dave Gifford who have little involvement with software outside TiddlyWiki, except as a user, but has that kind of tinkering technical mindset where he's prepared to experiment with TiddlyWiki. So if we describe those bunch of people, then so that's Nathan and Dave. Sorry, Dave's not on the call, so it's a very poor example to use, but I hope you won't mind. And then beyond Dave, so to speak, there's the people who would benefit from TiddlyWiki, but unlike Dave, aren't going to invest the time and trouble into learning it and adapting it for their own purposes. And I think that the way that we reach the people who are the other side of Dave Gifford, if you see what I mean, is via the people between Nathan and Dave. So it goes back to the idea that this is a community effort, that the TiddlyWiki core, that what you see at tiddlywiki.com is akin to the Linux kernel, and it needs userland stuff. And part of my job is to enable people like Dave, who's got great familiarity with some use cases and some users, to enable him, to empower him to be able to adapt TiddlyWiki to his own purpose. So I've got a kind of third-party model where there's Jeremy, the first party, Dave Gifford, say, or Alberto, the second party, and then end users as the third party. So I think that's that. I'll try and put some of this into words, actually, because it is certainly very relevant when we're talking about the things that we want to do to make the launch a success. So certainly I could say more clearly now that this getting exposure on Lifehacker, as an example, I think this would be a great stage for that. Lifehacker is, they cover plenty of stuff that's designed for end users, but there's often a technical aspect to things on Lifehacker. But I don't think we are yet at the point where, I'd like to get to the point where a national newspaper, The Guardian or somebody, says to the general population, TiddlyWiki is a great tool for you to use for such and such a purpose because it respects your privacy and whatever reasons from a media point of view they would find positive about it. And I don't think that's the target now, because to your original point, in order for us to be able to reach a broad population of end users, we need to have lined up a set of additions that are recognizable to those people. And the way to get those additions built is to extend our community out from Nathan, Dave, and so on, get more Albertos in who are able to do these adaptations to create additions. Sorry, Mary.
Jeremy, yeah, as you talked about the newspaper, so you mentioned the Swiss newspaper some I don't know, hangouts ago. I think it would make sense to tell them that there will be a new release, and then when the release is there, they can have probably a second review. Or, for example, I don't know, there are some bloggers out there that used TiddlyWiki for some time. I think it would be useful to reach them and tell them that there is a new V release, so there's no beta anymore, so that they share their information again. I think this would make sense.
That's an excellent idea, and what you just saw was me typing it into my to-do list. I also want to write a post to the TiddlyWiki group suggesting that this is a good time for anybody who wants to submit TiddlyWiki to a news outlet or a journalist. This is a good time to draw people's attention to it. But yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yeah, if I may jump in again, I believe there are two directions that could be of use to that approach. One would be maybe to, in order to make TiddlyWiki accessible to a broader audience and yet avoid them getting lost in the complexity or stumbling onto too much for their own good initially. Maybe it could be useful to put an emphasis on reader's version of TiddlyWiki, using TiddlyWiki for what it can do already, because the Classic could do that already, which is using it as a distribution platform for content. From experience, I've been using it for documentations and manuals, and in its simplest form, the ability to structure data on the fly and by queries to have self-contained documents or easily distributable documents that can be organized on the fly depending on the use case is a tremendous thing by itself.
Yes, I think that's the kind of case where there's one person or a small number of people publishing to many more, and that using TiddlyWiki gives you a bunch of options about the way in which you do that publishing.
And so I think what could be very useful with that is that it could help popularize the name TiddlyWiki and let people know that it exists, and then simply by distributing content that is maybe by default in readers only form, will lead people to look at it and figure, oh, I'd like to use that myself to publish, and come from that perspective.
So there's an idea I've had that I haven't really had time to do anything about, that I think would be an example of what you're suggesting, and it's to solve a problem of mine actually, which is I do quite a lot of my coding on the train, because where I live is an hour from London, so on a good day, I get 2 hours of peace and quiet sitting on the train to focus on work. But the challenge is a lot of I'm one of those people who I learn as little as possible, and I tend to Google things all the time, and so just random bits of JavaScript syntax particularly. So one could create a TiddlyWiki that was a web developer's reference that basically just repurposed content that's already out there. So for instance, the Mozilla Development Network content is all published under a Creative Commons license that allows it to be redistributed. And scripts could be written to download all of that content and to do, in fact, very modest transformations so that it could be displayed in TiddlyWiki. And then the thing that would go on Hacker News is not, here's TiddlyWiki, isn't it cool? It's, here's a JavaScript reference that's fully searchable that you can use offline in your browser, and you can bookmark, and it lives in your bookmarks kind of thing. And I think that's the kind of thing you're talking about, Yaka?
Yeah, I'm talking about that, but more specifically, I'm talking about exactly that, targeted towards people who are not web developers.
Yes, exactly. JavaScript is the worst example.
Jeremy.
Jeremy, I guess you get my meaning.
Yeah.
If I might chime in. While you were saying that, I was actually thinking about a slightly different flavor of packaged content. Do you recall the quick start document I created called TiddlyBard?
Oh yes, about Shakespeare.
Yes, it was an experiment in seeing whether or not you could take large volumes of content, and manage them reasonably with minimum of fuss. And I actually got, I think, 10 comedies, 10 dramas, and all the sonnets in one document. But if I had done it completely, I would have had the complete works of William Shakespeare, of course, all public domain works and well-known and of value to some people who are readers. And if you said, here's a complete works of William Shakespeare in a distributable web document, and other similar kind of references that are not technical references but are sort of definitive known works of content, even something like I don't know, a reference for stamp collectors or something like that, or some sort of not something that has nothing to do with the web, but has to do with a well understood body of content that can be
a game Bible.
Easily recognized for its value. It's already well defined value, but then say here's a new way of consuming it, and that shows off the power of TiddlyWiki, but doesn't confuse people by having them to understand a new body of content. It's something familiar that they already know. Automotive repair references, those sort of books, standardized, all it is creating a particular document template for a repair manual, and then taking content about how to repair your Volkswagen and dropping it in and saying, yes, we have a whole series of TiddlyWikis on how to repair your car.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with web creating or even editing the TiddlyWiki. It has to do with simply consuming it as a navigable document. I think of TiddlyWiki as in the same vein as how word processing was essentially large galley proofs, long, flowing page to page, with maybe headers and footers structured very minimally, and spreadsheets were, structured as grids with formulas. And here we have now a new kind of document structure, the hypertext document, self-contained but still hypertext. Unlike the web, which is hypertext but all fragmented into little pieces. So this idea of owning a document that contains all your information but having it structured in a hypertext way, and showing that as the power of TiddlyWiki, as opposed to all the you can customize it and make it. Because when people say, what's TiddlyWiki, I see most people talk about how you can customize it. That's the biggest thing people talk about is, well, what is TiddlyWiki? It's whatever you want it to be. And people don't like that answer.
No, indeed, and it's exactly to avoid that conversation, I guess, that we're coming at it from these other angles. let me show you another example that I've been working on, which is Yaka. It's another terrible example because it's in the technical domain, but still, that's where I am. So what this is dates from 2006 when a company called ThoughtWorks, who they employ a guy called Martin Fowler, who is one of the original instigators of the Agile Manifesto, which is an approach to software development. And they worked with BT, before I was hired by BT, to create an Agile cookbook as a TiddlyWiki that basically it's a bunch of reference material about how to run Agile in a TiddlyWiki format. So one of the things I've done in the background is transmogrified that to TiddlyWiki 5 format. And my plan, when I get a chance, is to publish this as one of the editions. So the purpose here, Yaka, is clearly it's another technical domain, but by publishing it as an edition, I hope to show that people that that's an okay kind of edition that we would welcome in the community, and to encourage people to publish other editions along the same lines.
Yeah, certainly. I certainly didn't mean to imply that technical domain application should be excluded for the sake of making it look public.
No, I think your point. No, I took your point to be more than that. That it's kind of like we know that we can reach the technical audience.
Yeah.
We've got good feedback that a bunch of technical people like TiddlyWiki and they enjoy playing with it. And so, no, I think the context for a lot of this conversation is how do we break out of that relatively small group and get our, we traditionally would say things like, how do we get our mothers to use it?
Yeah, basically, yeah. I've been confronted to that problem fairly recently, not with TiddlyWiki, but I just incidentally migrated my mother onto a smartphone, and it's been a very teaching experience for me. So yes. I'm very, very attuned to that sort of problem right now.
Well, and Nathan's had an interesting case. He mentioned his girlfriend right at the beginning, who must be quite technical because she works on websites, so at least HTML and CSS and stuff. And he's had the experience of getting her from this, I guess, conventional web development perspective to understand TiddlyWiki and to be able to use it to, solve problems in her domain.
And it's really been very surprising to me in this conversation, listening, how much both Yaka and Eric's comments strongly echo many of hers. She said that one thing in particular that stands out in my mind is she said that in many ways TiddlyWiki feels like this sort of club for nerds. Like it's there's a lot of sort of internal lingo and concepts that are sort of just assumed and things of that sort. And another thing that she said actually over and over again is, she feels great frustration in that it feels like everything she could possibly need or want exists for TiddlyWiki Classic, and none of it does for TiddlyWiki 5. One of her biggest sort of desires to see out of the project right now is that ecosystem that Eric pointed out as being so necessary, and I think he's absolutely right that it will be in that transition of that ecosystem from TiddlyWiki Classic to TiddlyWiki 5 that many of these problems that we're discussing now today sort of naturally resolve themselves. So this has been a great conversation to listen to for me because it's in many ways the same conversation that I've been having over the past weeks.
Well, let me. That's great to hear, Nathan. Let me show you something that interested me. This is a new person to the group who this week published their own collection of TiddlyWiki 5 stuff. What's interesting to me about it is that it's yet another person who's created plugins properly, so they're plugins with readmes and so on. So they've not just understood how to use TiddlyWiki, but they've understood how to do the things that I actually want TiddlyWiki enthusiasts to do, how to package their own version, how to distribute it on the web, so it's cost them nothing to publish it on TiddlySpot, and it's it is the start of the ecosystem, I think, but it's also evidence for me that the barriers to participation aren't prohibitive. There's no question that we can lower the barriers and make the process of getting into TiddlyWiki easier for more people. But what we need to kickstart this whole process off is more ukuleles. Not that I'm necessarily Eucaly, not that I'm necessarily pronouncing that correctly. And just to say, each Alberto or Eucaly who pops up, or indeed the other very interesting recent one is the ThiddlyBard, who has published two things recently: a plugin that makes FontAwesome easy to use in TiddlyWiki, and that's quite an interesting one for me because it's actually kind of straightforward to get FontAwesome working in TiddlyWiki, but it's only straightforward if you know TiddlyWiki backwards. What the ThiddlyBard has done is made it dead simple. I just drag that into my TiddlyWiki and bang, I can start using FontAwesome stuff. And the other thing that the ThiddlyBard has released is this edition of TiddlyWiki, well, the set of plugins for TiddlyWiki that permits an interesting and different plugin flow, development flow than we normally had. So again, it's less that this is something that's suitable for a wide audience, but it lowers the barriers for the next Eucaly. And in fact, I think Eucaly credits the ThiddlyBard with because he's been using, or that they have been using the ThiddlyBard's tools. So that's quite positive for me that, because I'm so, I've said this before, I think on probably every Hangout, but I'm so acutely conscious of the shortcomings of the documentation that, it's very easy for me to think that TiddlyWiki is very inaccessible to everybody. And yet, I think that the important thing at the moment is that it's accessible to the people who can help to build a community around it that will then, in time, gradually provide the entry points that are suitable for casual users to come along. So it's there's some kind of spectrum involved here, and we're going to move up the spectrum.
Right. We just need a lot more Dave Giffords before we can start pushing further down, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's, when you look at communities like WordPress, which is obviously bigger, but its target audience, I think, isn't that different than ours. There's a lot of Dave Giffords in that world. I mean, because each time somebody in the community produces something like the Alberto Scholars adaptation, it makes it much easier for the next people to step down their footprints. I think that in TiddlyWiki Classic, one of the things that happened that was a kind of tactical mistake on my part was that not enough of the improvements that happened outside the core project ended up getting fed into the TiddlyWiki core. And I hope this time around that I've set up TiddlyWiki 5 to be much better in that regard. So, partly about distributing other people's plugins and additions from a central place so that it makes it easier for end users to consume them, trying to make the process for people who are publishing editions to be easier and so on. So hopefully by the work, I think in terms of ease of use of TiddlyWiki, when I think about the actual challenges of what the buttons should do, when it should save changes and so on, I'm pretty comfortable with where we are. I think there's lots of room for improvement, but I think that the generic TiddlyWiki product is as easy to use as it needs to be in that sense. But it's about ease of learning, really what we're talking about. I think the abstractions that TiddlyWiki expects people to understand, things like content being split up into tiddlers that are identified with their titles, I think that stuff is reasonably easy for a lot of people. So it's about lowering the barriers, but by moving out from this kind of techie end of the community that's producing artifacts, resources, adaptations, and so on, that then feeds into the casual user end, so to speak.
Yeah. Building on your point about making plugins and community contributions more easily available, I think one of the very important aspects would be to try and keep some sort of easily accessible reference for first-time users. Not in the form of documentation, but maybe not traditional documentation, but maybe use case centric guides or directories, maybe. Because I seem to remember from Tiddly Classic, from TiddlyWiki Classic, that unless you were already in the fold, so to speak, it was sometimes very difficult to simply find the resources you were looking for, and it was very fractured and dispersed, and it was very hard to know what would work with what in terms of plugins and so on.
So some of that, I think, the answers lie in the way that we've set up the plugin mechanism and allowed this central hosting. So, in fact, plugin authors generally resist central distribution and plugins, but it's clearly in users' best interests, and I think we've got a reasonable balance there. What you described about use case specific introductions, how I see it is that the main TiddlyWiki site, which is the one I'm highlighting here, TiddlyWiki, what you get to when you go to tiddlywiki.com, needs to be two things. It needs to be the authoritative reference documentation for TiddlyWiki, and over the top of that, it needs to be tutorial material that will help the majority of people get to grips with TiddlyWiki for the first time, and that, of course, is the material that Dave's been adding. And then you mentioned these topic-specific introductions. That's where we would point people to the specific editions that are relevant for them. So I'm imagining you'd come to tiddlywiki.com, you'd hopefully within a few paragraphs understand roughly what it is, and then you would choose from some kind of graphical list with little icons by it, whether you were planning a novel, doing a to-do list, keeping track of your interactions with the hospital, or lesson planning, whatever. And hopefully, for over time, that list to become very large. I think that there should be dozens upon dozens of editions, because we need to make it easy enough that that's the case.
Yeah, as you pointed earlier, it's beyond your, for you, Jeremy, and the core developer team, it's beyond your purview and possibly your competencies to envision every possible use case, certainly.
So it's like a snail, the way that a snail gets bigger as the spiral grows out, that we start with this tiny kernel that hopefully gets enough things right that as the spiral grows and curves around, that it grows in the right shape and not deformed.
Yaka, I'd just like to say that, I think that, and this will kind of reiterate something that you said and something that Jeremy said as well. I'd much more like to see someone like you, Yaka, working on producing that content and those editions and those examples and that approachable material. Than someone like Jeremy or even myself, who is sort of so deeply seated in the core and in sort of the fundamentals of TiddlyWiki as a Twine and as a framework, that we're almost sort of removed from those concerns. Even Eric, who kind of straddles those two worlds very well, I think would almost be not well suited for building those resources. I think that much of that falls to folks like you to start coming up with those examples and start making that push.
No, I fully agree with that, and I think for once it's an asset to be a total illiterate. But my point is for that to work and to attract people who are not already enthusiastic or already aware of the possibilities of TiddlyWiki. It seems to me it's very important to provide sort of a framework that makes it easy to see, for people to see where they can contribute and where their individual experience are worth sharing, and because they can be reused by others. I'm thinking of a long time ago. There used to be a guy. His name escapes me at the moment, but who had a journal. He kept a journal. It was early in blogging, and he kept a journal about his experiences with BSD or FreeBSD. And it acted for a lot of people as a tutorial, because his step-by-step experience was acting as a guide for a lot of people who were stumbling day after day on the same problems he was stumbling. But that was in a younger time when the internet was very small, and it was relatively easy to find the right resource. And today we are in very different context. There is an overwhelming amount of information available, and it's very dispersed. And I believe what the core team of TiddlyWiki can contribute in that regard is to provide some sort of structure, not the actual content and not the actual guidelines and the actual tutorials, but help provide a relatively clear framework so that people are not intimidated and find it easy to say, okay, I can contribute this, and it goes there.
Yes. Yes, I quite agree. I think this conversation is certainly helping me to envision a clearer way, I think, to articulate what I'm trying to do, because I think a lot of what we've talked about here is very implicit for me. The idea that we, talking to Nathan and Mario and Eric as well, are laying the foundations for not just for users to slot into, but for these kind of ambassadors for TiddlyWiki. That's quite a good analogy. Who are doing this, localizing it to specific use cases, and how our strategy for growing TiddlyWiki is all wrapped around that idea. Not that we're not trying to grow necessarily grow the TiddlyWiki core product into being the best answer for everything for everybody, but rather we're trying to create an environment in which anybody can create, modify, improve, and share tools that work for them, and help them to find other people who are interested in using the tools as well, so that they can work together. So there's this idea, I suppose, that the core team is empowering a broader team, a more diverse team with more mixed skills and so on, to actually take the product out into the field and try and evangelize it.
I also think, Jeremy, I intend to create some more videos also for the German version, because I think it makes sense, and for me it's great fun. Because as I translated, for example, how you install TiddlyWiki or how you download TiddlyWiki with different browsers, it's, let's say, incredibly difficult, because you have to have the right structure. It has to be in the right, let's say, what's it called, the right way. Then you have to have the dialogues. You have to describe the dialogues that pop up and so on. And if you create the video, you just can show it to the people how it works. And for me, I think it's much easier. I like this more than the textual description of something.
And I think with videos, again, though, we need multiple videos from different perspectives.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's an introducing TiddlyWiki video at the moment in here, which is.
Yeah, I think you also did one that describes how to get TiddlyWiki for Android working. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's 3 or 4 in here. This, I mean, this one is old. It's November last year, so one of my goals is to redo that over the next week. But when you go to look at it on YouTube, you can't see my. Yes, everybody can see the stats. 5,500 views, which is obviously a very small fraction of the traffic to TiddlyWiki.com. But it does, I think, show that there's a lot of people who I think must be going, oh my God, there's a lot of text. Oh look, there's a video, bang, and they're much happier to watch that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it also makes description a little bit easier because writing the text is really complicated because if you missed a dialogue, maybe someone has a different setting in the browser. So, for example, the Chrome setting that you always are asked for the name. But if you show it, then it's natural, and if you describe it, it's complicated.
So I mean, this description here, I think, is awful, and it pulls me because it's so long. When I do it, and when I show people doing it, it feels like 2 or maybe 3 steps. But, because of exactly what you're saying, because you have to be so exhaustive in written instructions. It just makes it look awful.
Reading that text certainly takes at least 5 times as long as actually doing the thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's partly because I'm not, I mean, it's again my limitations as a writer, I think, and there's something also about me perhaps not being confident enough about who the audience is. So I mean, some of this stuff, is really basic, and it's not necessarily clear that it needs to be so basic. I mean, I think the way I was taught long ago, when you design user interfaces, you shouldn't design thinking that your users are stupid. You should design thinking that your users are busy. And I really like that idea. And I think it's the same with TiddlyWiki people. But it's people coming to TiddlyWiki.com and going, well, this is way too complicated, and closing their browser tab. I don't think that's because they're stupid. I think it's because they're too busy to get to, to put in the time to understand what TiddlyWiki does. And I need to cater for people who are in that situation. And the great thing also about a video is that it works on your phone. I mean, a 5-minute YouTube video is a perfectly reasonable thing to me in the UK, at least, to download over 3G. I could literally imagine people watching the video on a train, which they would struggle with all of this in that situation.
Yeah. Also, I thought I will prepare a video, for example, to use how to use TiddlyFox with FireFox for the German version.
Yeah, great.
Then I can create one for Chrome, and probably, or maybe Safari if I install Safari. But I don't have the possibility, for example, to create a video for Android or for iPhone. But no, I think that the basic stuff can be done, and I'll have, I don't know, 3 to 5 minutes and show it, because I think it's much easier to have a look at the video than reading the description. But I think the description has to be in that way, and also that there are slightly different things you have to do, for example, with Chrome and Android, or Chrome and Safari.
And then that is sort of covered. I mean, so the Safari one is even worse.
But it has to be in that way. So there has to be a different description, because it actually is different.
Exactly.
And if you say, okay, it's everywhere the same, then you're lying. And then the people come up and say, okay, your description doesn't work.
Absolutely.
So
okay, there was a couple of things that I was hoping to squeeze in before we close, and in fact, really, there's only one of them I'll just mention very briefly, which is about introducing the regexp filter operator, and I'm particularly looking at you, Mario, for this. That you may remember there's a ticket. Oh, hang on, I'm not screen sharing, am I? Oh, yes, I am.
Yeah, you are.
There's a ticket here about dropping support for regexp filter operands, and I've started to do that. So I've added the new regexp operator. I haven't yet removed support for the old syntax. And what I'm thinking of doing is, for the next release, supporting both to help people migrate their content.
And what should I do?
Well, I'm interested in whether it's worth going to that much trouble, really. But I think the place to discuss it might be here on the ticket. So I'll try and post something to the ticket. The other thing I wanted to just briefly talk about was, as I posted to the group, my plan is to have an endurance hangout on the 20th of September to mark the release of TiddlyWiki. And the idea of having, so it'll be a hangout that runs for 6 hours or something. And the reason for trying to do that is because it's something different to mark the release, but also in the hope that there'll be more people than usual, and different people, perhaps additional people who'll be able to come along. So I was just thinking about timing for that. I was thinking of starting it at midday UK time and continuing for 6 hours. That, I think, would be, so if it starts at midday in America, in the West Coast, are you currently 6 hours behind us, Eric? Is it 11:53 in California? Actually, my phone can tell me what time it is in California. But I think that would...
No, it's 8. We're 8 hours behind you. So
12
4 p.m. Yes, indeed. Yes, it would be 4 in the morning. So you're talking about
10 a.m.
Yes, so from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. West Coast.
So I think that's the worst case that we have to deal with. In fact,
how is it in Australia?
Well, I think any time where I'm awake is going to be poor for Australia. The thing I'm wondering about is whether to do it in 2 chunks. I mean, the trouble is it rather breaks the idea of it being one long hangout. But to do some of it late in the evening UK time, so say 10 p.m. till midnight UK time, which would obviously be much better for people in the UK, and actually, yeah, might do people in Australia.
Australia too, because 10 a.m. in Los Angeles will be 3 a.m. in Australia.
Would it? So therefore, so it would be Australia's late morning. Let me add Australia to my world clock.
It will be late afternoon and evening.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe that. What do you think? Do you think it's worth doing? And I mean, if we do it in 2 chunks, does that make it seem silly? Or maybe.
Jeremy, something that kind of comes to mind, we don't necessarily need you there for the whole thing, meaning we could just sort of leave it as an open-ended, rotating hangout, as it were.
Yeah,
so maybe that's the thing. Maybe, in fact, we should... Maybe I should kick it off at a little bit later in the afternoon, and we just keep it running for as long as we can. That would make it the endurance part, wouldn't it? And yes, I mean, I would have to drift away from time to time to attend to things here in the evening.
Well, Jeremy, if you started at your usual time, 4 p.m., that's 8 a.m. on the Pacific Coast here. And so if you started at 4 p.m. and went to midnight for an 8-hour marathon.
Yes.
But Jimmy, then when you leave your position, then you probably should write it. I don't know, information when you are back. So if people join and see, okay, I'll be back in half an hour, they maybe join half an hour later again.
Yeah, so I can use, there's this thing that Eric just used where you can get a little banner across the bottom of the screen. And so I could use that as for updates. Yaka's just said something else in the chat, well, say just 10 minutes ago actually, where he says, I'd suggest more screen caps in tutorials are good, but video can be a bit of a pain for a varied audience as the pace of reading, watching varies widely from one user to the next. So I would agree with that. As part of, I think with video we need lots of them. Again, targeting different users, different levels of detail, and so on. One video that I'm terrible at assembling to-do list tasks for myself, but what I have thought would be quite a nice thing to have in Hello There is not actually a tutorial video, but a trailer, by which I mean a 45-second video with probably music in the background that's got static images and what do you call the things? The Ken Burns effect moving across lots of TiddlyWiki examples to try and show people in a very short time, give them a sort of an inkling of what TiddlyWiki is capable of, but without needing to be bogged down by the need to be a tutorial. So a trailer video like that is obviously, it's not as useful as a tutorial in some ways, but to Yaka's point, one trailer video could serve most audiences, which is not true of the tutorial videos.
I agree with that. To get back on the point of that was raised by Eric earlier about promoting TiddlyWiki as a platform to raise awareness, as a publishing platform, and show that it's showcase its power without necessarily showcasing the editing capacities and so on. I believe something that could be very useful in promoting TiddlyWiki would be to create a small list of what people with some experience in TiddlyWiki deem as the most significant traits of TiddlyWiki. Oh, it's very different and very unique. And then try and select some examples, not generate them, but select them from community contributions that highlights 1 or 2 points at most each. Because there is a very real risk of information overload when testing something as new and different as TiddlyWiki. But people can get excited about just 1 or 2 points at once and grok them easily.
Yes, and it's also a lot easier to do those videos. I mean, Mario has an interesting technique. He does his screencasts in one take so that he doesn't have to edit them, which means that he sometimes has to restart them. I tend to assemble my screencasts from bits and do end up spending time editing them. And if you're not careful, it just ends up taking hours. Yeah. And obviously for me, during all of those hours, I'm just thinking about how much programming I could be doing, and how much difference that would make to more people in improving the product. Okay, so I need to buzz off, so we're going to draw to a close now. I would like to close by, before I do, any other final points or questions before we close? In which case, it falls to me to thank you all very much for joining me. As I always say, but really mean, it's incredibly helpful for me to have you here. The Hangouts would be much more boring if it was just me on my own. But obviously, in a wider sense, it's through these sessions that I get a lot of incredibly useful feedback and support. Yaka, it's great to welcome you to your first Hangout. I hope you'll be able to join us again. And I've really enjoyed the direction of today's discussion. I think it's been very timely and very useful, and Yaka, that's entirely down to your presence. We would all be discussing XML directory structures if you weren't here. So I think we're all very grateful for that, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. And actually, it's not my first hangout. It's the first I contribute to, and usually I listen to you guys discussing stuff. I barely understand them.
Yeah, well, by coming on, you've modified the thing that you're observing. I'm not sure which physicist is it who has that principle, but so very welcome. Yeah, the Heisenberg uncertainty.
Yeah.
So guys, let's wave goodbye to everybody out there, and then I'll press the stop broadcast button. And thank you very much, and see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.